And we welcome you back to the show, joined by a very special guest here. It's the assistant coach of the Detroit Red Wings, Dan Bylsma, former head coach of the Buffalo Sabres, the Pittsburgh Penguins, and a part owner of the Dubuque Fighting Saints. And Dan, first and foremost, thanks so much for taking the time to do this.
Absolutely. Been looking forward to it. There's not a ton going on, so look forward to getting online with you.
Absolutely. Well, glad we can provide a source of entertainment here for 20 or 30 minutes. We were looking forward to this as well. I know we just talked off the interview, but let's start with what life looks like now for an NHL assistant coach like you.
Yeah, it's I haven't seen so much of my family and frankly the inside of my house in maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years combined in the last month. We were in Washington getting ready to play a Thursday night game against the Capitals.
Mm-hmm.
And Wednesday night, the NBA had shut down. We got up in the morning. We had some meeting plans at the hotel, and things were starting to filter. We were unsure. We postponed those meetings. Players were all kind of hanging around and gathering, and slowly but surely by 11, 12 o'clock, we got the word that we would not be playing, that the NHL was going to go on a pause. And by 3 o'clock, we were on a plane back to Detroit. And literally we got off that plane in Detroit, and coach's word to the players was, go home, stay at home, don't leave your homes, and we'll get in touch with you. And we have been in that order. That applied to the assistant coaches as well. And that's basically been exactly what we've been doing for the last month.
I know you said that you've only been to the rink once since everyone had to travel home, but what's the day-to-day kind of look like for you? What have you been doing to try to stay occupied?
Yeah, it's we were 11 games left before the season ended, so we were winding down. Obviously, the Red Wings are not in a playoff position, so we didn't. We're unsure if they're going to start up again. If they start up again, if they're going to be regular season games, playoff games, what that would look like. So we've kind of gone through a couple stages in the last month, from doing a look back on the year, a year-end review type of thing, even though we still have 11 games left. We've gone over evaluations for the coaches and the players in the year, much like we would do at the end of the year. And we've started to do some homework and some investigating on hockey, different parts of hockey, talking to other coaches. So I've never been on so many Zoom calls, Microsoft Teams. I've learned how to give a presentation over the waves, and so we've been doing quite a bit of that, and that still continues today. It's a little bit hard to get motivated for those types of things, given that so much uncertainty, but those are some of the off-season things we would do, and those things have kind of started now, and things we're doing as a staff.
I was talking to my parents the other day. I said, it feels like we're living in one of those technology for dummies books with how much we're learning every single day with all this news. I didn't even know Zoom was a thing until this started, and suddenly I feel like I'm an expert.
Yeah, I'm probably not an expert, but from like I said, sharing files and doing video on calls and doing a presentation on calls. Like I'm my son, who's home from college, who's a computer science major. He has laughed at my my abilities or my learning progress in these regards.
So Zoom is obviously one way you've kept in touch, but just in general, what's the communication been like from coaches to team, but then maybe also from the league down to coaches?
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of information from the league. They're keeping it pretty close to the vest. We hear things, we hear scenarios, we hear possibilities, we hear through August and September, just as you do, but it's not coming from the league. We've been on calls in our organization with the coaches for sure. Mm-hmm. Stevie Eiserman, the GM, we've had a couple phone calls, a couple Zoom calls with the group, but really we don't have any information as to are we going to start? When are we going to start? What's it going to look like? So we're just kind of holding, waiting, and preparing for all possible situations. Whether that's not at all, whether that's later on, a month and a half from now, if it's July and August, that I hear some things no different than you about what Gary Bettman may have said in the last few days. So that's all news to me. And we're just trying to stay as ready as we possibly can. Been in contact with some of our players and where they're at, and having them stay potentially ready and try to stay in shape. So it's a lot different for all of us.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that Detroit's not in a playoff position, but record-wise, when you guys have been evaluating the season, when you're looking at some of the positives that you can draw from a year like this, what have the discussions been amongst the coaching staff?
Well, we knew this was a year we were going into. We don't like to say those words, but a rebuilding. And with Stevie Yzerman coming in, the biggest message was patience in that process. It doesn't happen overnight, and our job as coaches was to develop the younger kids in our organization to the best of our abilities, and those guys are going to be the cornerstone and the foundation going forward for the Red Wings, and that was our goal for the season. And it's tough to put a metric on that success when you don't win very many hockey games, which we did not. But, that was where we were at every day of the season. We're going to work to make these guys get better. We're going to work to progress this organization with these group of guys. And I think, at the end of the day, wins and losses wasn't a marker on that. But we saw that with a lot of our players.
I know you said you didn't like using the word, so I'm only going to use it one more time. But in a rebuild scenario, how does the mentality of coaching shift for you? I mean, I know you mentioned patience, but just how much does it shift from maybe a normal scenario when wins and losses seem to be sometimes the only metric that's looked at?
Yeah, it was actually really a huge growth year for me as a coach, and I think for us as a staff, because you're dealing with not winning very many games. Mm-hmm. And we're all about winning hockey games and need to be about winning hockey games. And you're entrusted with trying to develop a winning culture and a winning atmosphere and development, even though you're not winning hockey games. So it was really day after day, practice after practice of we're working to get better. We're working to progress down the road. We're working to get better each and every day we get on the ice. And I thought Coach Blashill did an outstanding job at that with our players, and I think it hasn't showed wins and losses, but it will in the future.
Some would say, I've heard it a lot, when you don't have all those expectations, there's less pressure. Is that true, or does the pressure just shift elsewhere?
Yeah, it's an interesting. I've been in both situations where winning's never good enough. Winning your last game is only good enough. Mm-hmm. And there's a certain amount of pressure that comes with that. It doesn't feel any different when you're not winning hockey games. You still have the pressure, and you still feel the crux of you need to win hockey games. And mm-hmm. and there's I do think though that it was good. It was good, and it is good in Detroit this year. The expectations aren't farther ahead than where we're at as an organization, and so you work within those expectations, and you just continue to work to try to progress and make your players better each day.
There's so much of this situation is unprecedented for everyone, and I think as human beings we thrive on consistency, on continuity, on structure, and this is throwing a wrench into all of that right now. Have you seen anything? I was trying to think of, for a hockey world, what this might be like. Is there any comparison to that 2012-13 lockout season in terms of we don't really know when we're going to start playing again? Is that a comparable at all, or is this so much different?
We've actually, again, I'm being on some calls with different coaches around the league. We've looked back at that season, looking forward to what getting back on the ice might look like. And, our training camp was 7 days when we got back in 2013. And, I think but it definitely is like, I remember back in that fall of 12-13 where we didn't know for sure if we were going to be playing, and you were kind of stuck in the limbo of how to prepare, what to prepare for, when's this going to start, is it going to not start, what does it mean? And so there's a lot of those scenarios that are here. There's even more uncertainty now because we don't know what it will look like. We don't know if it's playoffs, we don't know if it's 16 teams, we don't know if it's 24 teams, we don't know if there's regular season games. There's so much uncertainty here, more than 2012, 2013, but there is that work pause was for 4 months that certainly had some of the same kind of unknowns and uncertainties about it.
Like I said, tons of uncertainty. I think we've mentioned that word more so than any other word in this conversation so far. So let's dwell on some more certainties. And for people that maybe don't know, I mean, your coaching career has been well documented in the NHL, but let's go back way before that. And let's go to your playing career in junior hockey before that. Take us as quickly as you can, maybe a trip down Bylsma memory lane for the junior hockey experience.
Well, I appreciate it, but it's getting so long ago that it's harder I feel like I'm talking about someone else's experience when you go back that far. But I'm from West Michigan. Grew up playing amateur hockey in Muskegon, Michigan. So the L.C. Walker Arena, which I still think it is named today, is where I played my amateur hockey.
Okay.
And I played just rec hockey for until I was about 12 or 13 years old. A couple select tournament teams in that time where we would play 12, 13 games a year in tournaments. But at the age of, I played 1 year of midget hockey in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And that took me to the end of my sophomore year in high school. And at that point in time, I was done playing midget AAA hockey in the Little Caesars League. They didn't have us play any home games. We played all road games, so we were always over in Detroit, occasionally in Chicago, but we were always on the road for that whole year. I was done playing midget AAA and probably going to go back to Muskegon, and I got a phone call from two junior B teams in Canada with the opportunity to go to Canada and try out, play junior B in Canada. I had some experience with college hockey. My oldest brother played college hockey at Bowling Green. And so I knew some players that had come from Western Ontario playing junior B. And I took that opportunity for my junior and senior year of high school. So I played junior hockey, junior B hockey in Western Canada. Mm-hmm. Sorry, Western Ontario. Mostly for the St. Mary's Lincolns. And 2 years of junior B hockey before I went to Bowling Green and played 4 years at Bowling Green State University.
So take us through then the transition that just about every player makes, whether it's into coaching or something else. You're transitioning from player to something else at some point in your career. So what was that transition from player to coach? When did that journey start?
So I played 12 years of pro hockey after I left Bowling Green, going from East Coast League to the American League to the IHL to the NHL, and many times back and forth between those places. Mm-hmm. 19 call-ups and 19 send-downs in my 12 years. So numerous ups and downs, but eventually to the LA Kings, a little bit with the Long Beach Ice Dogs in that 4 years, and then to the Anaheim Mighty Ducks for my last 4 years, mm-hmm. and ending for the last couple of months in Cincinnati, the American Hockey League. So that was my 12 years in pro. And somewhere after I went from Phoenix Roadrunners, the IHL, to the LA Kings, I'd seen maybe 6 or 7 coaches in my time to that point. And then to the Kings, I started to, at that point in time, say, I recognized the level of coaching that may have had at different levels and saw different coaches, and said, I think I want to be a coach when I'm done playing. the game. So that was about 6 years in. So at that point in time, I started taking a journal. I started taking down drills. I started writing things down that coaches had done, said, things I liked, things I didn't like. And I did that for about 6 years. So by the time I came to the end of my playing career, um, which I didn't necessarily anticipate, had some injuries. It ended a little bit sooner than I would have hoped. But by the time I got to the end of it, Anaheim and the coaches and the GM knew I was going to be a coach, knew I wanted to be a coach, and even gave me that opportunity the following year. As I was done with hockey, we were going into the lockout. That was the lockout season the next year. But they had talked to me before the end of the season about the potential of becoming a coach. And so in that summer of the lockout year, as some players were thinking about playing lockout, not playing, I knew I was done, and I was moving on to coaching, which started, fortunately for me, the next year in Cincinnati, the American Hockey League.
For you, you mentioned this year was huge for your growth as a coach because of a different scenario. Where was the place early on in your career where you really felt your development shoot to that next level as a coach?
No question so my first 3 years, I had 3 different head coaches. Brad Shaw in Cincinnati. Brad's now with Columbus as an assistant coach, has been for a while. The second year went to be an assistant coach with the Long Island. And unfortunately, coach got fired in November, I believe, that year. Brad Shaw and I had gone to the Long Island together. Brad Shaw took over again as the interim head coach for the rest of that season. And then the following season, I went to Wilkes-Barre of the American Hockey League as an assistant coach under Todd Richards. So I had 3 different coaches, head coaches, 3 different scenarios. And that was a huge growth time for me as a coach. I thought I was ready to be a head coach after I was done playing, and I wanted to get an American League head coaching job. And I thought I was ready at that point in time. I was not. A few GMs told me as such, by the way. But I learned so much. It was like I talk about learning how to do Zoom and do a presentation online, and you're learning some new stuff. This would have been the equivalent of barely keeping my head above water, working, paddling extremely hard underneath the water to learn to grow as a coach in those first 3 years. And Bradshaw, Todd Richards they were immense in my growth in those first couple of years.
Yeah, and you mentioned head coaching. You have a pretty common story from a lot of people. You become a head coach in the NHL, and then 4 months later, you're a Stanley Cup champion. Just like everyone draws it up and how it happens exactly for everyone. I mean, take us through that whirlwind if you can.
Yeah, so in that third year, I went to Wilkes-Barre as an assistant coach. Todd Richards was the head coach, and that was 2 seasons of that as an assistant coach. The third season there, Todd had the opportunity to go become an assistant coach in the National Hockey League with San Jose, in which he took. And so I, fortunately, that would be the 2008-2009 season, became the head coach in Wilkes-Barre. So I'm in my 5th year. This is my first experience as a head coach in Wilkes-Barre. And there's more to that story for sure. But we go, well, it was February 14 to February 14th. So I think it was 53 games with Wilkes-Barre as their head coach when I got the call from Ray Shero on February 14th with the possibility and the opportunity to become the Penguins head coach on February 15th, which was in Long Island. And now I have 25 games left in the regular season with the Penguins. All those seem to go particularly well, and the story is quite a story. First year head coach, and starts in the American League, ends up in the National Hockey League, and ends up winning the Stanley Cup with the Penguins there in 2009.
You referenced the start of your coaching career right around that 2004-2005 lockout year. the year after is when Sidney Crosby and Evgeni Malkin start taking the NHL by storm, among a couple other players. 15 years later, they're still taking the NHL by storm. What was it like to coach those guys?
Yeah, that first year in Long Island, that was Sidney's first year in the league, and it's tough to remember. I mean, you're obviously there's lots of talk about this guy, first pick overall, and he's, talk about him being the next great player in the game, and he proceeded to get 100 points that year. 100 points, rookie season. We have rookies who are great players come into this league, and they get 60 points. They're doing awesome. They're doing great. Sid comes in, gets 100 points in his first year, and by his second year was pretty darn close to being the best player in the league. And it didn't take that conversation change to be potentially the best player ever in the game. And he's been doing that now for, I think you just told me 16 years, 15, 16 years, which is amazing. He's still pretty young. When you start at 18, he's still pretty young player, although he's been playing for such a long time that he kind of look at him as he's old, but he's not that old. But I think it's a testament to him and Evgeni. They've been great players for a long time. They're great players, and they're one of the best players. I think the biggest slight ever is that Evgeni Malkin didn't make it in the top 100 of best players of all time, potentially because you can't have two from the same team currently, but they're just they're amazing players. Their work ethic is unbelievable. I think I've just been doing some reading on great players and great people. Their work ethic is second to none, and it shows in how they play every night. They're unbelievable players. They're great players, and they're doing it night after night after night.
From a coach's perspective, when you talk about the players, the Sidney Crosbys, Evgeni Malkins, Alex Ovechkin, Connor McDavid more recently, where they have expectations on their shoulders from the time that they're 10 or 11. And it's not just expectations of being great, it's expectations of rejuvenating a franchise, being the face of a league. Is the work ethic what sets those guys apart in a coach's perspective, or how much else is different?
Yeah, you talk about that pressure, and I'm always never quite sure what that word means, but the expectation on Sidney Crosby is unfathomable. It's unreal. I mean, it's not only it's unrealistic, but it's also unreal. You're talking about he is the face of the franchise. He did save that franchise. He has those expectations that he takes with him every day, and those are enormous. And you ask what separates him. It truly is this guy's work ethic, and what he brings to the rink every day is unique. I tell the story often. Teams would come in and watch our morning skate, and GMs would sit down. A few people watch the morning skate of the opposition, and they would often come to me and say, "We have no chance. If your players, if Sidney Crosby and if Evgeni Malkin work that hard in a morning skate, then we have no chance to beat your team." And that's you see that every day from both of those guys. It makes them special players.
As we transition back to you a little bit, just reading up on a couple accolades, your fastest coach ever to hit 200 wins, fastest to hit 250 wins. You also coached in the Olympics. Obviously, we mentioned the Stanley Cup. When your career is not over yet, and hopefully not close to over, but when you look back at what's already been accomplished, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, really it's just an indication I got an unbelievable opportunity to coach some great players, and great players at the National Hockey League level. It's not something really you look at, or I even wonder how I got to 200 first. It doesn't make much sense to me. There's a lot of great coaches who've done a lot of great things, but stepping right into the Pittsburgh Penguins, even that first 25 games, they were, as a team, we were in a certain spot and hadn't done, we were a little above 500 when I started coaching the team, but immediately you win 18 of 25 games. You lose 3 games. I think it was 3 games, lost 4 in overtime and a shootout. You win 18 games. I guess that's how you get to 100 pretty quick, is when you coach a great group of guys and a great team, and they go off and win, at an 80% winning clip to start off with. But those accolades, while they're great, I don't think too much about them. Coaching the Olympic team was a goal of mine. From the start. It made a list of, I think it started my 2008-2009 season, and made a list of 5 goals that I had, both current goals and future goals. I didn't anticipate by 2014 having checked all those off the list. So, I was, one of my goals, I was super, super proud and super excited about the opportunity to coach an Olympic team for the United States, put on the jersey. That was a highlight for sure for me. And one, I'm only disappointed that we didn't beat Canada in the semifinal game.
Overall, you mentioned a couple of the coaches you learned under in your journey. At what point in your career did you feel like you had solidified your style of coaching, or a semblance of that?
Yeah, I would say, like I said, I thought I was ready to head coach after my playing career was done, but that's probably not true. And I'm glad I didn't, because I wasn't ready to be a head coach yet. But I took a lot from a lot of different coaches. And again, for 6 years I was writing down, taking notes. I had Larry Robinson, Andy Murray, Mike Babcock. At the end of my career, going a little bit further back, Coach Rob Laird, I had him for 2.5 years in the beginning of my career. So I was taking things from each one of those coaches, good things, bad things. This is what I want to treat. This is how I want to treat the players. This is how I will never do that type of scenario, and wrote those things down, and kind of had that as my coaching model and coaching standard. This is what I want to do. I got it from some other guys. I might have learned some things from some of those other players. I mean, Andy Murray was a tactician and prepared beyond belief. Mike Babcock was the best coach at building a foundation for your team and how you want to play and implement it with practice. So I grabbed things from some of those players and coaches, and but as I got to be an assistant coach, I also grew with Bradshaw and Todd Richards, and actually really figuring out how I wanted to play and how I wanted the team to play, and then establishing that when I started in 2009.
Well, we mentioned learning about Zoom, and one of the things I've learned is I get kicked off after 40 minutes, so I don't want to keep you too long, and also I think we only have a couple more minutes before this automatically shuts down on me. So a few more questions, and one that I mentioned way back at the start is your involvement with the Dubuque Fighting Saints. What went into that decision? Why did you make the decision to become a part owner of the Fighting Saints?
Yeah, my first, and probably didn't even realize it at the time, Johnny Gaudreau, Zemgus Girgensson. Zemgus was playing for the Buffalo Sabres. I was coaching him. We were in Calgary. I knew Johnny from BC. I had been there, talked to our team a couple times when he was at BC, so I knew Johnny a little bit. They're meeting and having lunch in a place in Calgary, and their billets from Dubuque come up to Calgary to see both of them. And so I had a conversation with Johnny and Zemgus and the billets from Dubuque. My old agent is Johnny's agent as well, currently agent now for Johnny. And a year later, there's talk of Dubuque, and I'm interested in Dubuque because of those guys. It's an opportunity potentially to become part of the ownership and see the stake in junior hockey, USHL hockey, developing players and getting them onto their dream of playing college hockey. And so that's what I took, where it came from, and kind of how it evolved.
And you mentioned junior hockey. How much does the NHL target with scouts target a league like the USHL, and how much have you seen that change in the last 10 years in terms of maybe more growth for the league?
The growth is enormous. 10 years ago, I'm not sure I heard of the USHL in terms of scouting and players coming through. It wasn't non-existent,
Mm-hmm.
but it very rarely. Then you would have 5 years ago, more of a part-time scout, that saw the USHL and saw players in the USHL. Now we're talking about full-time scouts, have them in the CHL in Canada, across Canada. You have them in the USHL as well. They're scouting the USHL. And I went to the playoff games in Muskegon last year, the 2 games there, and I guess I shouldn't have been shocked, but there was 12 scouts in the corner there in LC Walker Arena. You saw Dallas, you saw Nashville, you saw a handful of NHL teams. Their NHL scouts amateur scouts are there scouting the playoff series. So I think it's a significant that they're scouting the USHL. It's not only a stepping point for players to go to college hockey and get college scholarships, but it's the NHL is watching as well.
That was the last question I had written down, but when you talked about Zemgus Girgensons, we actually just interviewed him the other day for the podcast as well, and obviously you coached him for a few years with the Buffalo Sabres. I hear all the time from fans, from players, from coaches back in Dubuque about just how tough of a player he was. And I know hockey players in general are known for their toughness, but did that stand out for you when you coached him as well?
Zemgus will literally go through a wall to get anything accomplished. And I mean, literally, I think he prefers it if you ask him to go through a wall. He's a gritty, hard-nosed, contact, straightforward hockey player, and it shows up every night.
All righty. Well, no better way to end it than talking about Zemgus Girgensons, I think. Dan Bylsma, assistant coach for the Detroit Red Wings and part owner of the Dubuque Fighting Saints. We really appreciate the time, and thanks for doing this today.
Yeah, thank you, Jack.
Absolutely.